Hey everybody, it's zjayfi here from the OSG clan. I wanted to do a video today about what is not the sexiest of topics, but nevertheless it requires attention, and that is inventory management. Inventory management is a large component of this game. As a good friend of mine once told me, there is a ton of backpack in this game. Of course, referring to the time spent in menus, submenus, re-equipping, unequipping, loadouts, that sort of thing. Managing your storage, managing your mods, everything else that you can carry with you. So I'm going to show you all some tips about how to manage this stuff, and then I'm going to show you all how to manage it across 3 characters as a sort of meta management strategy. And hopefully this will help you to be able to keep a clean house, and that way you're running a mission, you don't have to worry, oh, do I need this? Do I need to pick it up? Do I have one of these? Do I have a better one of these? There's a way to keep track of all this stuff. And so we're going to start looking at some things. I keep 12 builds on all of my characters at all times. One reason for this is so that all the characters have something that's in use. And that way, let's say I want to look at my character, okay? And I'm saying, well, which one of these things should I put in the stash, and which one of these things do I need to keep on me? Well, if everything's in a build, you get this nice little build marker right next to the little star that tells you that it's in a build. That way I can quickly flip through, and my system is that exotics do not have to be in a build in order to be immune, but everything else that's not in a build should go in the stash. And you'll note that I have 85 pieces that I carry on me, so I still have room to pick up 15 items if I come across something good, and I can run it one in, one out with the stash. So I replace whatever I find that's better than the one I have with the one in the stash. So take the one in the stash out, sell it, break it down, whatever I'm going to do with it. You can also add it to your recalibration library. But as you can see, everything that I'm carrying with me, with the exception of this, I just got this last night. So all I took me was one quick flip, and I know exactly that this needs to go into the stash, right? So I probably have a Fenris mask that's similar to this one in the stash. So we'll just flip down to our, it's Providence, to our Fenris pieces. Here's one right here. Ooh. And as you can see, while this one is really nice, the one that I just had is marginally better, because even though it has slightly less weapon damage, I can put the big 3 of the DPS trilogy, if you will, which is I can overwrite the weapon handling with the critical hit chance, and this will be a nearly triple god rolled Fenris mask. So as much as it hurts me, unfortunately, oh, that's a Providence, not a Fenris. Unfortunately, this one is going to have to go, and the one from the inventory goes in, and that's it. So it's one out, one in. That's how you manage your inventory. Piece of cake, right? And you'll find that you always have, with 12 loadouts, assuming the loadouts don't have pieces that cross over, you should be hovering right around 80 to 85 items all the time. You'll always have room to pick it up. How many guns do I carry? I always carry any guns that are in a loadout, same thing. And like I said, exotics are exempt from this particular system, so I always carry one of every exotic on every character, whether it's in a loadout or not, because you never know when you might need it for a given specific situation. So I always carry one of every exotic for every character, and that one is exempt to this policy of one in, one out. There's another one that is no longer in a loadout. It's been replaced by something better. It needs to go in. So that's how you balance your inventory for your characters. How do you balance your stash? Well, here's a few interesting things that I've discovered. The vast majority of your storage space is going to be reserved for weapons, body armor, and backpack. Obviously, these are the hardest ones to get the perfect one that you're looking for, right? Because they have the most variants on them. They have the talent as well as 3 different attributes and a mod slot. So these are going to take up the majority of your spot. Same thing with the weapons, because they have talents and 3 attributes. So you're always going to try and keep those around 60. That way that's 180 of these slots. And then you're going to have about 30 for the 3 remaining slots each. That would be how many? 160 plus 90. That still leaves you with a little bit of room if you need to put a sidearm in there, if you need to put something else. So as you can see, I'm slightly over budget on mass and knee pads at the moment. If I need to put in more weapons, whatever. But I like to keep this balanced at 60 weapons, 60 body armor, 60 backpacks, and then 30 apiece of each of these. Makes it, actually that brings me up to 120 since there's 4 categories right here. Mods. I never ever keep mods in my stash because they take up a spot, and you get 100 spots on your character right here. So there's absolutely no reason to be keeping mods in your stash unless you're sending them back and forth between your additional characters. I don't give myself any leeway on that. I need to get rid of some of these defensive mods, but I still have 30 spaces. So how do we keep our mods, this particular spot, clean, right? How do we know what we need and what we don't need? Well, it's kind of irritating, but it's easy to just go through each one at a time and click on the square button and then click on the mod window. And as you can see, I only have 1 of each type of mod. If I find that I have doubles, see if I can find one with a double. Nope. Nope, no doubles. But like you guys can see what I'm doing here. You just click on each individual skill individually, check your mod slots and what mods you have available for it. And if you find out that you have doubles, was that a double? Yep, there's a double right there. I have an 8.8% health here. I have an 8.2%. Well, you can't use them. These are slot specific. They only fit in that one specific slot. So we know we don't need that. Now, if I had a double damage here, now this one obviously only works with the demolitionist, so we need a regular damage too. But if you find out that you have doubles, those are slot specific. For example here, it'll only fit into this particular slot. You can't put it into this other slot, otherwise it would appear in this window. So we know that we don't need this one, because you're never going to want to put a lesser duration in there, right? Doesn't make any sense. And that's how you keep that clean. So you just take this stuff up, sell it, break it down, do whatever it is you're going to do with it. And now let's go ahead and log out, and I'll show you a little bit of the meta for managing 3 different characters. That's how you keep one of your characters clean. How do we keep all 3 of our characters clean? Oh, I'm sorry, I should say 4, because you could potentially have 4 characters, but this one right here is a hardcore character, and so it doesn't have a stash. I don't think it gets a stash until like level 40 or so, till end game, I believe, and it gets its own separate stash. So I have 3 separate characters here, all of whom have their own loadouts and their own inventories. A couple of these are a little over budget right now on my inventory. But I'm going to show you all how I divide my loadouts in between characters. So that very first character that I just showed you guys contains all my raid loadouts and my a couple of legendary loadouts and a couple of PvP loadouts. I keep all the raid loadouts on one character because depending on which strategies and which group you're running with, you may need as many as 6 to 8 loadouts, and depending if you're speed running or if you're just running a regular raid, whatever it may be. And then I keep a couple legendary builds, and I keep a you should have a PvP build, at least 1 on every character, but maybe 2, because you never know which builds you're going to encounter some other player running. You might want to mix it up, switch up strategies. So I usually keep like 1 hard-hitting PvP build in there, and then 1 very difficult to kill PvP build in there. As you can see, this character also has 12 separate loadouts in it. This one contains some of the same builds, which I just did again, like the crowd control build for a legendary. It also contains a Vanguard build for a raid, but it also contains some experimental builds that I have a lot of fun with, like the Fighting Medic is a regenerating tip of the spear build. It's got some PvP builds in it, hazard protection and hazard armor, unbreakable PvP, and then they all have a soloist variant, and also there's some skill builds and a really fun deflector shield build in here with the Liberty pistol. So some of these are fun builds that I just have a good time with playing either by myself or if I just happen to be on this character. Either way, you use the same strategy. You try and keep only what is actually in a build on your character. Now I do have some overflow here. This one's holding on to a few extra pieces because secondary characters tend to be mules, and I keep the first character optimized and clean. This one handles a little bit of the overflow, but not too much. As we get to the third character, you'll see more of the overflow, and obviously the second character is more developed than the third character, but I continue to work on that. And so which builds you make depends on what you have available that's developed for the character. I mean, if you're making a technician build, you can't do it on a character that doesn't have technician tree fully developed. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's flip over to character number 3 quickly, and I'll just talk about a few more things that should never end up in your stash. Obviously mods, and you don't want an excessive amount of any type of mod. It can be anything. Like, for example, you don't need any more than 4 critical hit damage mods on one particular character ever. You should only have your 4 best. So if you're going through your inventory and you find out that you have 6 critical hit damage mods, well, that's 2 spots where you could trim something out of your inventory. If you open it up and you have, excessive amounts of skill haste mods, you don't need that stuff. So here's character 3. Once again, I think this character's full of loadouts. Oh, it still has 2 slots for loadouts. But this character obviously is another secondary mule character. It has a lot of stuff on it that isn't necessarily in a build, but I needed to clear out of the stash for space. But this character does have a lot of different experimental loadouts. This is the character where I try new and crazy things. This is where I send all sorts of niche stuff that I think I might need someday, but I probably never really will. Let's see if I can find something like that. I guess not. Actually, this character seems to have some pretty decent stuff on it. I think I sent a whole bunch of skill stuff over to this character at one point, but a lot of that seems to have gone away by now. But anyway, so we were talking about what should never be in your stash. And on the first window I open, I'm violating my own rule. What should never be in your stash? Hardwired. Hardwired shit should never, ever, ever be in your stash. And let me tell you why. Hardwired always crafts the same. It always crafts with 1 skill tier and 1 attribute slot, meaning that you can re-roll it into whatever you want it to be, and it will be god rolled immediately. Every single hardwired piece that you craft, you can instantly god roll by just re-rolling it. And since you can always craft hardwired, there's absolutely no reason for it to be in your storage space. You should never be storing that stuff. And the same thing applies with aces and eights. As you can see, I'm getting rid of that here. Aces and eights, Negotiator's Dilemma, and Tip of the Spear, you can craft. Now I realize that materials for that particular one can be harder to get because you have to run a raid. I don't even know if I have any or not. Yeah, I do. I have E-based materials for all of them. But if I wanted to get more E-based materials, if I wanted to craft, if I wanted to spam craft one of these gear sets, I'll just spam craft and then I'll run the raid, and I might get the piece I'm looking for while I'm running the raid, because a lot of these are raid sets after all. But once again, since they only have 1 attribute, they're pretty much god rolled if they're skill based, like hardwired. Now, if they're not skill-based, then you will have to work a little bit harder at it. But since you can craft them, it just doesn't really make sense for them to be taking up a lot of space in your inventory. So try not to store too much don't store any hardwired, because you can always craft a gold roll one. But if you are going to store Tip of the Spear, Negotiator's Dilemma, or let's see, what's the other one? Tip of the Spear, Negotiator's Dilemma, or Aces and Eights, you should make sure that it's a really, really good one, and it's the one that you're going to use. Don't waste inventory space on half the stuff. Now, one more thing that is interesting about inventory management. If you look through my chess pieces, see, we got reds, yellows, a couple blues, but you'll see that it's predominantly red as we go throughout. At a nearly 2-to-1, maybe even 3-to-1 ratio, I've got more reds than I do blues or yellows. Now, why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that stuff that comes with skill tier only has 2 attributes. So it's only got to be 1 out of 2 has to be a good roll, because the skill tier can't be less or more. It just is what it is. So yeah, I've got 9.3% status effects right there. That's pretty good. So all I have to do is overwrite Armor Regeneration with a God Roll Yellow, and I've got myself a really nice Empathic Resolve chess piece right there. You only need 1 out of 2 on yellow pieces, whereas something like this, you have to have 2 out of 3, which, hey, that's a decent chess piece for Mad Bomber right there. Not bad. Same thing here. Yeah, same thing with the blue stuff. Blue stuff, I don't store nearly as much of it, but I think that reflects more my playstyle. If you're a big blue player, then yeah, store more blue stuff than red. If you like to play builds with a lot of blues, absolutely do that. Obviously, I'm a more of a DPS leaning player. I store a lot more red stuff. I guess the point that I'm making here is don't fill up your stash with skill stuff unless you are a dedicated skill player. That's who you are. That's what you play. Skill builds. You can always craft that stuff. Because think about it. Anything that you craft is let's say I'm crafting a Wyvern chess piece. I know it's going to roll with 1 skill tier. So all I need is a 1 out of 2 of the other rolls to be usable, and boom, I'm good to go. I've got a much better chance of being able to craft a skill tier chess piece than I am anything else. And same would go for skill knee pads, to go gloves, etc., etc., etc. And that brings me to the final thing that I wanted to talk about in inventory management. And again, this relates back to skill stuff. Let's say you're moving along and you find a really, really nice pair of China Light knee pads. Okay, and it's got 1 God Roll on it. And the first thing you're thinking is, oh man, I should save these. I could use these. Well, should you though? Because you could come right here and craft some, and you're going to get a skill tier. I mean, you may be not going to get a God Roll, but you might get a usable piece. Right? So you only need one God roll for each individual attribute of skill that's available, which in skill case would be skill damage, repair skill, skill haste, and status effects. So if you wanted to have 1 knee pads each of those God roll, you could put that in your stash. I wouldn't recommend that you do, but you could, because the skill stuff is much, much easier to get a decent roll on. The other thing I can tell you is that, like, let's say you're in the field and you get a good pair of the China Light Industries Corporation's knee pads. You know that you can craft those. Do you know what other pieces of China Light you can craft? Can you craft the backpack? Yes, you can craft the backpack. Can you craft the gloves? Yes. Can you craft the chess piece? No, you cannot. So it helps to know which pieces of which brand you can craft. And part of that goes back to Gear 1.0 and trying to know what exactly it is that is available to craft for each brand set. But if you're familiar with these, you'll be much better equipped to manage your inventory. You're like, well, wait a minute, I know I can craft Alp Summit Armament holsters. So I'm not going to fill up my stash with Alp Summit Armament holsters because I know I can just craft those if I need one. And since they're a skill-based brand set, I know that I'm going to have a pretty good chance of getting something close to what I want. Right? So that's just something for you guys to think about as you're going about managing your inventory. If you're trying to manage 2 characters, 3 characters, these are some tips that I have learned. I'll show you once again. I keep 1 exotic on every character, 1 of each type of exotic on every character. That way I don't have to fill up my stash with exotics, and I know that every character has all the exotics. And then I also make sure I don't keep any hardwired, any raid gear sets in my stash. I don't keep many exotic weapons in my stash, although I think there are a handful. Yeah, there are a few. And that's pretty much it. Every character follows this same outline. Keep the builds full. That way you can tell at a glance. You know which ones are in loadouts, which ones aren't. If you're moving things into your stash, you go 1 in, 1 out. Like let's say I want to put a mask in there, you take the other one out. You keep your mod slots. Keep your mod slots cold, C-U-L-L-E-D, meaning if you have doubles, make sure you clean that out so that you have room to pick up stuff. And just some simple things like that will make your characters much more manageable, and they won't be constantly full, which you'll find is really annoying when you go out to the field and your inventory is always over the top. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this character out because she's about 10 pieces over the limit. And thanks for watching. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Leave me a comment if you have any questions, comments about how you manage your inventory, or maybe some way that I could improve. And I'll catch you guys next video. Later.